If you die from cancer, a car accident, or organ failure, you could be listed as a climate change death. That's the absurdity in which our world is headed, and Pennsylvania is about to dive in head first. Next. The reality, of course, destroys this. After 100 years of climate-related deaths, they're approaching zero, a 99% drop since 1920. There's the chart. This was a peer-reviewed study and data that came out earlier. I think it was late last year. Next. So the solutions. The era of constant electricity at home is ending. Look to Europe. In my book, Green Fraud, I have a whole chapter on what Pennsylvania can expect if they go down this route. Families will only have power when it's available. Next page. And you're going to have chillier homes, particularly in winter, require personal changes. Home radiators will have to be 10 degrees cooler. This is their Green New Deal. This is their version of the beginning of RGGI in Europe. Next. So Governor Wolf is bragging that funds brought through RGGI will allow us to make targeted investments to support communities affected by the energy transmission. Next. But the ridiculousness of this is he is going to be harming the programs. The targeted investments are going to go to workers that RGGI is going to help put out of business as it starts raising the cost and trying to shut down industries. Politicians will force unnecessary unemployment and then portray themselves as the heroes. Next. So Governor Wolf's claim of supporting workers is akin to saving someone from a sinking ship after they were the ones who put holes in the boat to ensure that it sank. Next. Pennsylvania's ground zero for this is a warning here of all the different outside groups and inside groups funding, trying to get this climate agenda imposed and radically transform Pennsylvania. There's some of the groups. Next, good. Wrapping up here, the climate futility. There is no climate crisis, no climate emergency. If we actually faced one and we had to rely on RGGI or Green New Deal or UN Paris, we would literally be doomed. And if we actually did face a climate emergency or crisis, you'd want to do the opposite. You would want to have no planned mandates, no auction programs, no administrative state, inside baseball terminology of people deciding who gets auctions and what price and who gets subsidies and who got. We would want to promote economic growth, prosperity, innovation, technological advancement. So let's throw all of this out. Here's what's happened with all of the previous climate pacts, beginning with Rio. Carbon dioxide has had a complete steady increase regardless of all the alleged solutions. Next. Keep fossil fuels in the ground. That's what advocates claim. Pennsylvania has been doing it right. Keep your independence. They should keep RGGI in the ground. Permanently bury RGGI's cap and trade regulations. Thank you. And there's Governor Wolf at the door. Reject Governor Wolf. Reject RGGI. Reject this whole idea. Celebrate Pennsylvania leading the world in energy, not only independence, but dominance. Next. Thank you very much. That's my book, Green Fraud. And next, CFAC.org is my parent company. And next, that's how you reach me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Morano. Mr. Bastardi, Chief Forecaster, Weatherbill Analytics, LLC. Thank you, sir, for joining us today.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Yeah, I know there's a lot less people here, but I'm used to that. I used to be in a rock band, and by the time we get up on stage, everybody's walking down anyway, because I was the lead singer. So, first of all, I'd like to say that anything, I don't believe that's the first one. The first one starts with the computer models. So let's take a look at this here. Here we are. That looks good. Excellent. By the way, all you carbon-emitting organisms in here, here's what we're going to do. You just hold your breath. You exhale 100 times more than you inhale CO2. So you stop it for 30 seconds. You can cut this in half right here. But I've got a better solution later, and I'll tell you about it. First of all, for 45 years I've been doing this. This is all I ever wanted to do. So many people saw me smiling here when people testify. I'm not laughing at it. I'm just so grateful to God above that I'm doing what I was made to do. So I want that understood, okay? As someone said to me, how come you're always happy when you're talking about the weather or whatever? I said, hey, it's like being a kid at Christmas. I get to open a gift every morning. But in working with this stuff, and the reason I'm still surviving in the private sector is I can beat the models from time to time. I'll take a tie with a model anytime I can take it, but if I beat it 10, 15, 20 times a year, guess what? Clients pay me, okay? In the private sector, we have to hit the forecast to get paid. That's all it's to it. So anyway, I want to show you something here, and Pat already touched upon it. I'm glad he talked about the Russian models. I don't want to be accused of collusion here, but there was a Russian model that saw what was going on, all right, and didn't have any CO2 feedback in it. So, I just look at that and say, do you really want to trust those climate models for future policy? Or at least, think about it, all right? Now, I'm going to show you on a practical scale. Move to the next one here. Why the overwarming? Why is that happening? Because models feed off their own forecast. If it's warm, then it's going to get warmer. Okay? So nature tries to fight that. We have Le Chatelier's principle. I'm sure all of you are acquainted with that. And destructive, what we call destructive interference. It's like, let's say I come into folks on the other side, your committee, okay, on the left, or you know, who don't see climate change. I come in there, all right. Naturally, the 10 that are in existence will resist the one that's added. Okay? It's the same thing in the atmosphere, except in many more variables. Nature tries to fight it with that. If the warming is a warming natural or man-made, the model that was closest had no CO2 feedback in it. However, I actually have a problem for this CO2 problem solution for it, and I want to talk to people on the other side. I like taking questions from the other side. I love that stuff. You know, I'm an old greedy in the first place. So let's remember, though, folks, the cat was left out of the bag in 2015. Let out of the bag. When Cheetah McCarthy, and I thought it was over when she said it. They'll only save 0.01C, but it'll be a great example for the rest of the world. I got a better example. I'm going to show you why America can lead this if you have a fear of CO2. And I don't disagree with Greg at all. I think he's spot on right. I agree with Will Happer. I think they're spot on right. But look, there's a huge fear of this. I see it all the time. You see companies moving toward that direction. So I got to acknowledge that. All right, let's keep going here. Let's look at the model, just a practical aspect. So I'm a long-range forecaster. I have energy companies, wind companies, solar companies. Listen, if you told me Cheetos, you eating Cheetos and snapping your fingers, you know, will lead to global warming, I say you still need a forecast, okay? So I don't care what your attitude is. I'm an old style guy that says, there any politics over here, I'm going to make your forecast and make the best one for you. So anyway, I've got all these clients in the Central Plains, right? And February, right? And by the way, my company was the one that hit that 10 days in advance because I knew the maps from 1899. Believe it, I look at that stuff because I'm a complete geek and nerd with this stuff. That's how I binge watch. And so 10 days before, I'm advising clients on it, and I got a lot of energy companies out there, including wind and solar. So anyway, for the spring, look at that. Above normal, that's the European, the vaunted European. Let's move to the next one. There's the Canadian in lockstep. Hey, U.S. model can't be outdone here. Boom, let's go to the next one. It's torrid for March, April, May, right? Look, let's move on to the next one. Look what actually happened. It was cooler than normal. Then what happened was it predicted it to be very dry. Move to the next one. You, Steve Martin, okay? But you can see how dry it was predicting it to be. Look what actually happened. All right? Now, there's a Canadian forecast. There's the U.S. forecast. It's exactly opposite. Now, what are the implications of that? Well, not only over the 3-month period, if you're an energy company, you have to take that into account and say, well, listen, if I'm expecting to be 2 above normal, it's 2 below normal. If I'm in agriculture, I'm expecting no rain. It rains a lot, or vice versa. That's a big deal, right? It also has an effect on the summer. Even though it got hot in Texas for 5 days, they've been running below normal. So instead of having a hot, dry summer, all right, guess what's happening? You see how much it's raining down there, right? Rain is nature's fight back, all right? And by the way, what happened to the big dust bowl that was supposed to be developing? Remember 2012? The start of the new dust bowl. I used to say, how the heck did we have the old dust bowl if the new dust bowl was because of CO2? The old dust bowl was really bad in the 1930s. In any case, it had implications down the road. So I have to predict that. You got to understand that I'm probably the oldest bottom line operational forecaster still willing to speak because it can get in the way of business. All right? Everybody's moving the other way. My attitude is stand up, say what's right. Don't force anything down someone's throat. If you want to talk to me, ask me questions, I'll be glad to show you stuff. That's great stuff. You know, that's what makes the world go round. Now, on the past few winters, all right, of the last 8 winters, 4 have been colder than the modeling had, as far as population weighted demand goes. 2 have been warmer, 2 have been good. What I'd say were good, but you can say, oh, look at that winter forecast, it hit perfectly, right? You saw what happened in Texas, which was just unbelievable. 10 days before, it was like, what's going on? I'm sitting there going, look at this, look at what has happened before, and the models are going the other way. So that's not a good track record. Models can't see if it's going to get cold. Why? Because of that feedback. Remember I told you about that feedback? What happens is, and I'll explain this with water vapor, the #1 proxy for climate is water vapor, not temperature. Temperature's a very poor proxy for climate. I'm going to show you why in a minute. Which means if the forcing that led to where we are now changes, if something changes, there'll be big problems. Cold kills more than warm. Cold kills more problems. I ask people on the other side of the issue, okay, what do you want the Earth's temperature to fall to? You want it to fall back to the 1970s? You realize what that would do to crop production around the world? What about CO2? What's the perfect level of CO2? Dr. Will Happer says we're in a CO2 drought. If you actually look at the geological history, we are. And also, how is it a climate emergency today, and you can talk to Greg about this, was a climate optimum in the entire geological scale of the planet? How does that happen? Let's go to the next one. Well, points to ponder. Oceans are the largest source of heat and CO2. If the oceans warm naturally due to many factors, among them natural cyclical intersection, multi-century cycles intersecting at the same time, okay? It's like a rogue wave. If you've ever been out on the ocean, all of a sudden, what the heck, where did this wave come from? There's no wind. It's because of intersection of various factors that created other waves that can't be seen in the ocean, but when they combine together, it goes off. Long-term solar, we've had 200 years of high sunspot activity. I tell the solar scientists that say, oh, we're going into a little ice age now. Well, what are you going to do with the heat from the 200 years of high sunspot activity, but sunspots, right? So there's, that's involved too. I argue with people on my side too. Underwater hydrothermal vents, what do you think would happen to CO2 levels and temperatures if the ocean warmed? Well, they're going to go up, right? Look what's happened. Go to the next. So what happens if the oceans of today, take a look at this, right? What if we cool back to the 1980s? Next slide. What do you think is going to happen to the global temperature, right? Now you say, well, the CO2 is warming the oceans. Now that's pretty interesting. You know why? Because there's no meteorology that we use that correlates CO2 to temperature. We correlate water vapor to temperatures, but not CO2, right? Oh, look at this, there's 3 times the amount of CO2 coming out of Houston. It means that something else is going to happen. So what is used is this abstract idea that somehow this small, minute trace gas in the atmosphere is pushing around the thermal energy of the ocean, which is interesting. We can argue about it. Let's go to the next, discuss, I don't like to argue. I argue with myself. Let's go to the next one. So look at what just happened with the La Nina, right? The temperature just dropped like crazy. Now, first of all, these are adjusted, every 30 years they adjust the means. My theory is these super Ninos release immense amount of water vapor in the air. Immense amounts. Much more than just a regular El Nino. When they do that, it takes a while for that to disperse. When it finally disperses evenly across the planet, you can't really see the rise in the warmer areas. But you see it in the Arctic, and I'm going to explain why in a moment. Let's go to the next slide. So what would be the effect? It would naturally cool because of the La Nina. We could argue about CO2, but consider this. The warmth of the past several years came in the wake of the Super Nino and the second El Nino. So you had back-to-back El Ninos. This put immense amounts of water vapor in the air. The reason for the step-up function of temperatures, because it takes 20 to 30 years for the atmosphere to wash that extra water vapor out relative to the temperatures. You see, at minus 40, it takes the increase of 1/10 of 1 gram of water vapor to correlate, per kilogram, to correlate to a 10-degree rise. You can't see that in the tropics, which is why when people say, oh, it's getting worse in the tropics, that's not happening. So this puts immense amounts of water vapor in the air. Water vapor is correlated most strongly where the air is coldest and driest. So once the water vapor is dispersed, most of the warming is in Arctic. During its winter, there's no summer warming. Take a look at the next chart. This is where the lion's share of the warming is coming in the winter in the Arctic. So instead of freezing to death in a minute, you'll freeze to death in a minute 10. It's still very, very cold. But look at that. Can anybody here explain why it's not warming in the summer? Well, I'll tell you why. I'm like a lawyer. I ask so many questions I think I can answer. Go to the next one. Okay? If water vapor increases, make huge difference where it freezes. We know that. Melting takes heat from the air, freezing adds it. Okay? So when you're freezing something, it actually warms it a bit. Snowfall. Now this is La Chatelier, so the natural fight back of the atmosphere. increased water vapor, increased moisture. What happens in the winter, well, even though it warms up, it snows more because it doesn't warm up enough to counteract the fact that, you know, if it warms from 20 to 22 or whatever it is, it still snows. What does snow do? Snow breeds snow, snow breeds cold. Just like drought breeds heat. There's all these feedback mechanisms going on. It's amazing. I believe strongly in my Heavenly Father, and as I've grown as a meteorologist, I realize I know less for one, and for two, the atmosphere is hard to believe how majestic and infinite it is. Next one. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Now, here's the question, all right? How do we get rid of CO2 since there's so much fear? Okay, so what I'm trying to do is, if I want to prove my point, let's make CO2 a moot point and then see what happens, all right? People, listen. The fact of the matter is this: people fear CO2. Now, we can argue about how much, but it seems to me that everybody's trying to hammer away at it, right? So, one, and this is in my book, by the way, I was looking at Mark with this COVID. Mark, that was a good forecast I made a year ago that they were going to go from COVID to climate